So we'll be working from here. We're logged into the data. So here's our demo company. And I'm just going to go ahead and log into that company. User one. Oops. User one. Oops. Sorry. Guess my typing skills aren't really good. So you're going to go in and restore, and then you're going to be, your company will be on this company list, and this my company. And I'm going to go ahead and delete this company here. And we're going to go ahead and go into create a new company. And so we're just going to call it test, just for those purposes. And then there, the wizard, you click next. These are some standard things that are typically just kept in terms of transaction types. If we were copying another company, we might copy the bank accounts, but you're not going to want to do that if you were starting from scratch. I'm just going to say use the current chart of accounts and copy financial periods. There is the option to go in, and there's a variety of predefined charts of accounts, and you can select any one of these. And then if you wanted to preview, you click preview, and you can look at that chart of accounts. But we're going to use this chart of accounts. Your chart of accounts and your converted data will be the exact chart of accounts that you had in People's Choice Classic. So this part of this is already being taken care of in the conversion of the program. Then they would click finish, and it's go ahead and create the base files and so forth that, again, has already been done in your converted data system. But as we move forward, what normally takes place is we define the, let me see, we have a couple people late. I'm going to let them join in. And hang on 1 second here. Go. Yes. And okay, we had a couple more people join here. So while it is linking, when it's done linking, it's going to take us to the company information page where you put in your company name and address and federal ID number and so forth. And then we'll just confirm that the financial periods are what we want. And then we will create one bank account. With payroll, you have to still have one bank account. Even if you don't plan to use the accounting, you still have to have that accounting foundation so that we can track all the payroll transactions on a level of the general ledger. I know some of you have a different accounting system and are only using People's Choice for payroll. And so there is a general ledger report that can be a journal entry report for entering in any particular payroll into the another accounting system if that's the situation that you're working on. I don't know if some people will pattern their chart of accounts in People's Choice payroll to match up with the chart of accounts they have in another payroll program. So it makes it really easy to create a journal entry in another program using this report that has the GL accounts. So got a couple more people that have popped in. So we still on a new company would type in user one, if I could type right. And for the purposes of our demo, I'm just going to call this my company. And I'm not going to fill any address. And I'll just put in 23-1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I think that's how many digits there are. And then we will click done. And we'll go in and we'll double check on our financial periods. That's in accounting. And we can see that it copied in this year's financial periods. We can go and the chart of accounts is here. It's the chart of accounts that we copied from. We can go in here and edit, change, so on and so forth. And what we need to do though is create one bank account. There are no bank accounts, so we'll just say new. And again, I will make it, typically you're going to put in the account number of your particular bank account, and you're going to make it active, and we'll just call it my bank. And you want to attach this bank account to your general ledger, so we're just going to select check trust. And then if we wanted to resync our check numbers, I'm just going to leave them as is. But if we had existing checks, we would put in the next check number that needs to be entered. And we have the basic accounting. We could actually start going in and entering checks and so forth. There is, let me just double check. I believe we have everything set up in our general ledger. So we have everything set up in the general ledger, and we'll be coming back to this screen when we go to on the accounts receivable setup. But for now, we're just going to go into payroll. And it's going to detect that this is a new payroll company, and we don't have two, oh, two, three. So we're going to create a new payroll year. And now it's saying, oh, this is new. So we're going to go into the wizard. And so we would just confirm our information here. Our minimum wage is going to be $15. And we're going to use middle check. And we'll set this one up for weekly, but here's where, however you're doing your payroll, we would run it that way. You would click next. You would want to add the state tables that it applies to you. And I'm going to use this is in Iowa, and I'm in Iowa. I'm going to go ahead and add the Iowa taxes. And again, all this has already been done for you in the converted data that we have. We don't have local. We want to go ahead and add to this. Oops. So we're going to be going into the templates, but if you have that, it's going to add that to the template, and that'll make a little more sense. And I don't remember the rate's going to vary from business to business. I'm just going to put in 1% rate. Oops. And next, and I'm not going to, these would be some standard deductions that maybe you're going to have. I won't add any deductions for right now. We can show how that can be added later. And I'll click next. These are other pays that you may want to add, and you may want to add these. And so for our purposes, I'm going to say, yeah, we're going to track vacation hours. I'm not going to track anything else, but you can set all these up. And so here's where you would be assigning this. Again, I want to remind you that all of this have already been done in the converted data that you're working with. or will be working with. But this is where we're connecting our payroll to the general ledger, and we're telling which accounts to use. We don't have a local tax in Iowa, but so I'll still just I'll assign it to the account. Federal unemployment is down here. The state unemployment is right here. And employee deductions. And you can have multiple, you may add on a much more deductions. They could all go to the same GL account, or you could assign each deduction to a different GL liability account. The default wage account, again, you can have as many wage accounts as you want, and each employee can be assigned to a different wage account. But for our purposes, we're just going to use salaries as our default wage. And as far as the default expense accounts, we'll assign that. And so we'll just put them all into here. And unemployment. Now, a lot of places will have a separate GL account for each of these particular tax expense. This is the expense that the employer incurs, and it isn't what the employee will see, but so there are expenses and not liabilities like the other. We don't have funds, so we'll move on to the next screen, and we click finish. And we've gone into here, and we've can look at our various setup. We can go into the employee taxes, and we can see that we have all these taxes. We got the Iowa tax. If you're in a different state, you'd have, again, this will be all in here in your converted data. And in here, you'll already have your employer Iowa unemployment, so on and so forth. Oh, I'm going to just double check this. I don't, yeah, we got this at 100%. That's what I was afraid of when I said that. Oops. So, oh, good old Murphy's Law. If something can go wrong, it will, huh? Oh, bear with me a second. Gonna pause. So, I'm not sure what happened there, but we're showing this. I will update those liabilities. And so we have the basic set up where we could go in and we could run a payroll. And in our options, this is set to weekly. Sure, when we go into, but we have not added an employee yet. So what we're going to do is, and I'll backtrack and we'll review this a little bit more, but we're going to add a new employee. And we'll click new. And this is going to be Robert. Good guy. And Social Security is 1, 2, 3, 4. And we'll see these templates, and you can see these are templates based on what we're we'll go back and we'll show how you set it up. But this will be something that you may want to do after you've gotten converted and start using the system to prepare for when you're going to hire a new employee down the road. Then this is the process you'll go through when you get a new employee. We're in a weekly, so we're selecting the hour paid weekly, and we click create. And so now we have that, we can put in the address, date, so forth, and we could go to the miscellaneous tab, and it's a mail with, it's kind of our mini HR section here. And again, it reminds us this is the employee template that we're using. And if we are going to implement direct deposit, this is where you would click here and you would put in their bank information that they want their payroll check deposited to. And again, we'll go into a little more detail for that if that's something that you're wanting to do once you get everything converted and you're up and running.
Hey, Roger, can you share your screen again, please?
Oh, thank you. Okay, where'd my...
Thank you. We're good.
Yeah, you're on.
I appreciate that. Sorry about that, folks. I'll back up a little bit in terms of, I don't know what you saw, but I went in and created a new employee, click new, and then put in the name. We went to here. We went ahead and filled this information in. We want to probably double check that we're going to pay him $20 an hour. So I'm going to set a default wage of 20. And all we have right now is weekly and overtime. But there's where we can add additional pay types. And that's where we could add vacation if we wanted to add vacation pay types, but it's pulling over things that are on the template. And so if you want to have those other pay types, you can go in once you get your converted data and add those new taxes or new pay types or new deductions to the template that you use most frequently. And then those will all be set up in this section here. These are the taxes for this particular one. So we're good here in terms of the federal income tax. This person is single, but here's where you go to change it to be married. And you can change this default to in the template to say, always start with a married or always start with a single. In this one, they were always single. When you get into the married and other things, the new W-4, we can get into that a little bit when they select box 2 in the W-4 form, and you have to go in, and we can have that for a future topic to go on how you would set up the taxes if you wanted to do it strictly by percentage or additional taxes instead of using the tax tables that are generated by the IRS. And so if we were going to double check on these are all the employer expenses that take place for this particular one. And we don't have any deductions, but if you were to wanted to add one, you could. Here's where you would add those deductions, or you can go back into setup and make a custom deduction. These are just the templates that come with the system. And in benefits, that's one thing you don't have in People's Choice Classic. But if you have employer benefits, such as you pay a portion of a 401k or contribute to their IRA or some other benefit, then you can actually go in and you can track those types of benefits. If you were the ones that are already in the system are these particular ones, but you can also customize your own benefits that can be used in the system. And if you want to track vacation pay, that also can be added into the system. And we talked about tracking paid hours, and so you can go in here and set this up. And again, we could focus on a future topic on tracking of vacation pay and how you add to it, subtract to it. A lot of people do it manually, but you can set it up to automatically add, 1 hour for every 8 hours worked or that type of thing. And if you want to show it on the check stub, so when an employee gets a check, they could see on their check stub how much vacation hours they have available. So these are all the things that we have set up for Robert Goodguy. And so now we should be able to go in and enter payroll. And we have, so we just say, now the way that it's set up in here, it's set up to automatically default overtime on a weekly after 40 hours. And so if you keyed in 50 hours here, when you go to calculate your payroll, it's going to put 40 in the weekly and it's going to put 10 in the overtime. Now that can be shut off so that you select it, or if you never have pay overtime, you don't have to have it displayed here. You could just remove it from the list. And the only thing that you plan on ever paying this person is on just a regular hour weekly, and he worked 40 hours and he gets $20 an hour. And like I said, this is to the point of where you are when you get your converted data. You can go in and enter in the pay data and, oh yes, I need to change my year, I'm sorry. So we're just gonna go, let's use today's date. And it's a weekly pay period, so we're just gonna say, we'll say today's date is the 20th, the 19th. So we'll just say it's for the pay period 9 through the 15th. So 10 dash, no. Oh, I gotta work. So we calculated, we go to the calc report, and this is a lot what we reviewed in the first class of just processing the first payroll. So, but basically what I wanted to demonstrate was just, if you were to start from scratch, those are all the steps that you would need to go through to get to this point. And it's this point that you're being delivered your converted data. But I also went through this process. So some of those things that you can't use in People's Choice Classic, you see a little bit where we would go back and do some additional setup to take advantage of some of those features. And so if everything looked good with this, then you would just go ahead and click create checks. And no, I don't want to make a backup. It's going to be a computer, and I don't want to print a check, so I'm just going to click it as manual. If you were using direct deposit, you would actually, and you had some employees getting a paycheck and other employees getting direct deposit, you actually have two options here. For the ones that are getting a paycheck, you're probably going to be printing a computer, but for the other section down here for the direct deposit, you're probably going to use other. And there'll be two different check sequences created. We don't have direct deposit. Like I said, I'm just going to use the manual check, and I'll go ahead and we create checks. And so I'm not certain why it did that, but I'm not going to troubleshoot that now because it was working on your system whenever I've tested your data. So anyway, that's where we go. But where I wanted to back up to, once we got that basic setup, is once you get your converted data, what you may want to do is review these employee templates and employee pay groups. You saw that I used a template that hourly paid weekly. This one right here, when I set up my employee. But if you're paying bi-weekly, you would obviously do this one. So however, you're paying and normally pay, you may have more than one. I mean, I know many of you have a salary paid weekly versus an hourly paid weekly. So this hourly paid weekly, what you may want to do is to go in and update this for how your business is set up. So you would go in here into taxes. And so you would make sure all these are set up. Yep, that's the ones that I want. I don't have any other taxes that I need to add to my template. So I'll just close that. That'll be fine. I guess if you do want to have the default be married, you could change this to married. But otherwise, you can easily do that after you've selected the template and got the base set up. Same way with pay. You go into the pay setup, right? The default, like we said, is weekly, hour paid weekly. But if you wanted to add vacation, you can come into here, click new, and go to vacation pay and add that. It is taxable, so add that. And so now they have vacation pay. Now this is in the template. So if I had that in the template, when I created the Robert Good Guy employee, he would have had vacation pay as part of his different pay types. Now notice it's not enabled. So maybe you don't provide vacation for a new employee. So you want to start out, you want to bring the vacation pay type into that employee, but you don't want to enable it yet. So you would do that in the employee setup, maybe 90 days from now, or however long they have to work before you start giving them vacation pay or sick pay or any of those particular ones. And typically the wage, if you set it up, is still going to be the same $20 or whatever your default wage is for a starting employee. Again, all these things can be overridden once you've created the employee. This is just eliminating a lot of the steps of having to assign every pay type, every tax, just if you just started with a blank one. So that's the whole purpose of the template process. So we're just going to click done. So we've added that to our weekly. Again, this is our default ER liability, everything. Again, this will all be coming over, but you want to verify that you have it the way you want for when you add an employee in the future. Same way with the deductions. I know a couple of you had some deductions. So if those, I'm not sure, but I don't think those get added to your templates when we do the conversion. So you may want to go into your template and add the deductions that you are using. They'll be on the existing employees that got converted, but that doesn't necessarily mean it got it added to the template. And so if you had those, they should be already in there. So you would select, whatever deduction you might have. And again, maybe you're going to have it active or inactive whenever you start up a new employee. So I'm going to say, okay, let's always start with active. So that gives you an idea. And then the salary, you could go through the same process and you could go ahead and update your different salary benefit or vacation, that type of thing you could add to the system. The whole point is it's just a quick setup of a new employee. And so you can customize these any way you want. You can also, in the pay groups, not many people do, but you don't have to have it by pay frequency. Some people will do it by department. So they'll say, I want this group to be department A and this group to be department B, etc. And so you put them into, what I mean by the pay groups is when you go in to run a payroll, as you know, we've been just selecting fees, but you can you exclude all these other ones if they're active, or instead of having them by, like I said, by pay frequency, if you had them by department, it's like, well, I'm going to go do this department's payroll. They could all be the same pay frequency. It's just they can get grouped together, and it's just one way of managing it. But for most of you, you're just going to have the one, whether it's weekly, bi-weekly, or however you pay, you'll have that set up as yes, so that when you go to the next pay run and enter in the pay data, the previous payroll will come up, and you can go ahead and and enter in the new hours and calculate and go forward. So the other items that you might want to review when we, as you backtrack, you know, I set up the template so that it covers most of the basic things, but you may have a certain kind of pay type that's like, now I can think of one where they set up a non-taxable pay type for a travel stipend. And so you can come in and make a custom pay type, and you can have it set up, and whether it's going to show up on the W-2 or not, or you know, what box codes are you going to use for the box 12 codes in the W-2 when you go to generate W-2s. And that's as true of the same with the deductions. Now, one of the things that we work through in these conversions, a number of you have a pre-tax deduction. And so these are typically pre-tax deductions. And how you set up a deduction, you know, you can set it up as a fixed amount, as a percent of gross pay, a percent of net pay, etc. We just leave it as a percent. So you can come down here and define the percentages, and you can set a limit to say it's 3% for the first 10,000, and then after 10,000 it goes down to 2%, or however you want to do the levels of these contributions. Now this is in the employee section, and there's a separate for the benefit on the 401 for the employer's contribution that you can set up that, you know, if they pay 3, we'll pay 2, or however your matching goes. But the most important thing in that pre-tax is you would come up here and in most cases, and you want to talk to the administrator of your pre-tax deduction, what taxes are exempt. In most cases, it's just the federal and the state tax, and Medicare and Social Security are not exempt. But that's something to determine from whenever you're setting up a pre-tax deduction. They need to tell you which taxes that it's eligible to be exempt from. And I mean, and from a state, it could vary from state to state if there's certain state pre-tax deductions. But this is where it's set up, where you define which taxes a particular is. And the vacation, again, we can go into that in a separate, but that's where that would be set up here. So these are all your base setup of things. Your People's Choice Classic, basically, when you look at it from a pay type, you only have the options of regular, overtime, and other. And then there are some things where you can split the other up a little bit, but you don't have unlimited pay types like you do here. And so when we do the conversion, we're basically converting it like it was in Classic, where you just have regular and overtime. And if you I don't think we've seen any conversions yet that have been using the other. It's just mainly regular and overtime. Where here we can expand that beyond. But from a conversion standpoint, we're just converting it the way it was in Classic. And it's up to you if you want to expand it from there with the ability to add more pay types and the benefits and so forth. And so that's why I kind of wanted to just go through the setup process, even though you don't need to do it. You can, it does give you an idea of some of the things that you can do that you weren't able to do in People's Choice Classic. So that's the basic setup for, we didn't go into a lot of depth with the accounting side of it, but just setting up the basic accounting where the payroll is attached to the general ledger. And so all transactions that are in the payroll get posted to the general ledger, and we can go in and print general ledger reports. And again, those are useful if you were going to be connecting your payroll with another software package. So with that, I'm just going to go back to our slideshow. Mouse is acting up. So those are just some different groups instead of weekly, bi-weekly. Here's one for a city that we set up where they had different sections in terms of those pay groups. So otherwise, let me see if I can open it up. So if I the chat. So is there any questions on what we went through as far as the training section here that we covered in the setup? Like I said, it's not anything that you really have to do as far as getting started in your going forward, but I'm hopefully it gave you a little bit of idea of where we can zero in on. And I'll want feedback from all the participants in the class. It's like, boy, I really plan on using direct deposit. Please make sure that that's one of the future sessions that we can go into depth of setting up direct deposit, or the MICR check printing, or vacation pay, or employer benefits, all those features that are available. You know, we can set aside certain times to really dive into those particular things that will help you make a decision and which ones you want to implement. And I'm mainly suggesting that these all be considered as part of starting out January 2024. I would, most of you, I think you just want to get through the rest of the year as is, as you're doing in Classic, but maybe during the month of December, you go ahead, okay, this is how we're going to do it. We're going to add vacation pay. We're going to add this. And you can get all those things in place so that when you do your first payroll in January 2024, you'll have those new features in place ready to use. So does anybody else have any questions on the basic setup? I apologize for some of the glitches I run into. But hopefully you were able to get an idea of some of the flexibility and capability of the People's Choice program. And I don't see anything in chat. I don't see anybody else has any other questions. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and move on to.
Roger, Dan Murphy had something in the chat that just popped up.
Oh, can you do multiple conversions as we begin using the program? Yes, I mentioned a little bit on the front end that we are going to be charging extra for converting additional data sets over and above the one that you're using for the class. We kind of ask that you wait until we get through the conversion of your payroll company. And then if you have other companies that you want to convert, we can proceed to do that. We're still deciding. Some are much easier to convert than others. So what I have found in terms of most of our Classic customers who do have more than one company, one of them is just their personal, and there's no payroll in it. And so converting that is much easier and much quicker than converting one that has payroll. And same way with receivable. If you have both receivables and payroll, it's a much lengthier process, especially if you have a lot of volume. So most of the other companies that our customers have are like their personal books, or it's another small side business that they track their expenses and revenue and so forth, but they don't have any payroll in it. It's all 1099 supplier subcontractor setup. But I don't think we've established how we're going to charge for those different types of conversions depending on what's being converted. Any other questions? So let me see if I can get back on track. What is there? Oop, guess I already got it open. So I'm going to go ahead and switch companies. No, we'll stay in my company here, because we're going to move into the accounts receivable. So in the accounts receivable setup, what I'm actually going to be showing here is what's most typically done in a new setup, where the conversion's a little different in that People's Choice Classic, the accounts receivable is on a cash basis, meaning you only post to the general ledger when there is a payment towards an invoice. When you create an invoice in Classic, nothing happens in the general ledger. It's only when you put a payment to it and whether it's a payment in full or a partial payment, it's going to go ahead and post to the revenue section of your general ledger, where a vast majority of our existing customers who aren't coming from Classic are on an accrued basis. And so you'll get an idea of what takes place in terms of the setup of the AR. And again, we'll be going through some of the sections real fast, because when you get into inventory and some of the other things, such with the cost of sales versus perpetual, or are you just using the inventory as a pick list for like a macro of filling in default sales accounts and so forth. But in the setup of the AR, you go to the general ledger first and you assign the accounts that you're going to use for on an accrual basis. Whenever we post an invoice, it's going to debit accounts receivable and credit the revenue account that's on that invoice. And so you set up these control accounts if you're going to be using those particular things. And we won't go in a lot to the accounts payable, because the closest thing that you have in Classic to accounts payable is that feature called unpaid bills. And that's a very shallow accounts payable. This accounts payable is, you can create purchase orders, convert them to a bill, and then pay the bill through an accounts payable wizard. So if you want to keep a running balance of what you owe people, that's when you would explore accounts payable. And we probably won't cover much of that during the class unless some of our class members said, yes, I really want to implement accounts payable. And it can be done on a cash basis as well as accounts receivable, meaning you can go in and create bills, but it isn't posting anything to the general ledger until you pay the bill. So it's kind of an off books, if you will, when you talk about cash basis accounts receivable or accounts payable. So these are control accounts, and these are default. If you were going to use the inventory for a pick list or even for perpetual inventory, you can set up default GL accounts for that particular one. But in terms of what, we alluded to it in the last session, where we could have different formats. I mean, there's one wanted to have that professional format that didn't have a quantity, it just had a description, and it always has it in the background. You don't even see it a default quantity of one. Or you can have a product or a service, which are very, very similar, but you select one of these as this is what I use 90% of the time. As you're entering in invoices, you can always, when you click new, change your default to one of these other two. Then also here is where you set up how you're going to number your invoices. I know we have one in our class that they write up manual invoices and then they key them into People's Choice after the fact. So in those particular ones, you probably don't even want an invoice number. You're going to key in an invoice number based on what's on that manual invoice. Most people use a sequential invoice, meaning you start with 1001, then the next one 1002, and so on and so forth. Or some prefer a date sequence. Well, what a date sequence is the first two digits are the year, the next two digits are the month, and the next two digits are the date. And then the -01 it's the first invoice for that date. And if you create another invoice on that date, it'll be the 02, 03, 04. And so when you look at the first section of numbers, you know exactly what date that particular invoice was created on. And then some people, if you're using perpetual inventory, you're going to have to start using sales orders to track your perpetual inventory. Some people like to use their invoice number and sales order number as the same, but you don't have to, obviously. And if you want to be able to edit the ship tos, you want to show balance due on printed receipts. You have some of these that are your defaults that you're setting up. And down here in terms of freight and other charges, some are going to be taxable, some are not going to be taxable. That's going to vary from state to state. And so if you do charge freight and it is taxable and you always want it to be taxable, then you would check it here. And if you always will have an option on the invoice itself that if for some reason it's not taxable, you can uncheck it on the invoice so it doesn't charge tax. The source of order, that's just if you want to keep track of where you got a customer, you know, they go, oh yeah, I saw your ad in the paper and blah, blah, blah. You could go ahead and put that on the invoice that you got that sale as a result of a newspaper ad. So if you're tracking your source of your sales, you can define them the way you want right here. If you have different ways of delivering, fulfilling your invoices, if there is a shipment of some kind, you can do that. If you do want to set up salespeople and must track their commissions, that can be done. You know, in our case, we would have a sales tax. We're in Iowa. To keep it simple, I mean, we can have multiple taxes, but we're just going to make this 7%, but you might have a city tax. And if I recall correctly, in Iowa, actually the Iowa tax is 6%, and the city tax typically is 1%. And those can be but you can have as many sales tax rates as you want. With some will be real elaborate, like in Iowa, there is a code for each city. And so you could have a city code here and whatever rate that is. And in some places, there may be a city and a county code, but you can set up all your sales tax rates here. I know we have one customer who ships throughout the country, and so they have like 100 different sales tax rates, because sales tax is typically charged on the point of delivery, not of the point of the billing. And so when they ship to different locations, there's different sales tax that come into play. So, and if you got some different terms, you know, you can set up, you get a 5% discount if you pay within 10 days, but it's definitely regardless due in 30 days. So you can set up your own terms. Most people actually use a default of due upon receipt. So those are some of the standard things for setting up for your own business. And after conversion, you can come back in here and modify these any way you want. If you are going to use the inventory, most of our users actually aren't doing perpetual inventory. And so you can just shut it off so you don't have a problem with that. But if you do want to do perpetual inventory, you turn it on. And how are you going to track the cost in terms of a weighted average, FIFO or LIFO? And unless you're an accountant, you probably don't know the difference. And so you would probably consult your accountant if you're going to try and do a perpetual inventory. In terms of categories, some people want to have different categories. Maybe they want a service item versus a product item versus all different kind of categories. You can have as many categories as you want, and you can assign each item in your list. And if you're going to do price levels, you can get into different price levels based on the different types of customers. So I'm just going to leave these all off. Again, if there's some interest in some of you, it's like, yeah, I really like to find out more about the inventory, then we'll maybe assign a particular week's class for that. So, and if you were doing purchase orders, you can have different copies of which, if you're printing out multiple copies, again, purchase order can be done the same as invoices, as you can do a sequential or you can do a date sequence. Now, purchase orders aren't in People's Choice Classic, so this would be something that would be totally new for you to use. And again, you can create purchase orders, and then when that purchase order product is received, you can mark it as received, and then you can convert it to a bill. And on the purchase order, you would want to make sure that the total on that purchase order matches up with the bill the vendor or supplier provided you. So you know that you have the freight and all those other charges that might be added into a purchase order when you receive the bill for it. So you would add that, and then you can convert it to a bill and then put it in accounts payable and pay, once a month. Sometimes a lot of people do. So those are the basic information. So once you've got into there on the sales, here's where you're mainly just looking at invoices in People's Choice Classic, and you don't have to mess with quotations or sales orders unless you were going to go to perpetual inventory. Then you would have to start using sales orders. But you never had quotations, but you do have the ability to come in here and create a quote. And it basically, it's like creating, this is our new company. We don't have any customers in here, but you can set up just like an invoice, and then whatever you quoted them, you can convert to a sales order or just convert it to an invoice. So a lot of people like to give out quotes ahead of time. If you have something where you're charging a monthly fee, then you could set up recurring invoices. You do have a feature like that in Classic. I'm not sure how many of you have been using that. Here's where you would actually go in and set up your customers. Now, all your customers are going to already be here, but to start from scratch, you would click New. And your customer number, you can assign your own customer number, but if you were just to type in, I'll set myself up. Oops. Why is it jumping over to that field? So I don't want to use that, so I'm just going to make it. So you can override it, or it'll default to usually it's the first initials of the first and last name or the company name. And then if you have a lot of ABC, it'll be ABC1, ABC2, and so forth. And so you put in the address and the state and the zip code and the phone number and email address, especially if you're going to start emailing invoices. And you can set up a copy of all invoices get sent to somebody else. Notes that you would have here, if you want to classify your customers, whether it's a rural, or if you want any kind of a classification or region. If you're dividing your territory up and say, well, that's from this region, that region, you don't have to use any of those. You do want to set up some type of terms. If you were using salesperson, if you want to default ship via, you can, whether you're going to email or print the statements. And in the detail, typically you're going to assign a tax. And we'll do it this way. If you want to set up a credit limit, meaning that once they hit 1,000, you're not going to allow them, or if they have a past due balance and you don't want them to be able to charge anymore, You can put them on a credit hold and it won't allow you to create an invoice for them. If you did get into different pricing, you can come in here and you can select a different, you can discount by a percentage, or you can get set up pricing codes that like, oh, you're a special customer, you get this pricing. So this is where that part would be set up. Again, that's something that we could dive into if it's of any interest to you. And if you are going to be applying finance charges, you know, what's the finance charge? I need to go back and set that up. So finance charge accounts. So that's what it would get posted to. And then there's quite a bit of variables in how finance charges are collected. We can spend some time on that in a future session. And if they did have a prepaid something and did an applied payment, it's going to show what their outstanding credit balance is here. And that's just something that will always be available. So you can keep notes on a customer. It's, you know, like we stopped and tried to whatever, and it'll timestamp those notes. You can always just do an update on what their aging is of that particular customer. You do have the options to set up, I believe it's 999 different ship tos per customer. So you could have different addresses for each of these ship tos. And also in there, that's where I got into where different sales tax can come into play on different places that you ship to. So in this particular ship to address is where you would say, well, use these sales tax whenever I ship to this address, as opposed to another address. And the master invoice is where you would create the recurring invoice. If you were setting up invoices that you were going to charge every week, every month, or every year, they can be set up accordingly. So those are the basic sets up of a company. So we should be able to go in at this point and do a quote. If we got that one that we started on here a little bit, now that I didn't put in the address, so it brought me up. And we don't have any items in inventory, but if you had any items in inventory, you could do that. Or you can just type in new car. And it is taxable. And we're going to sell that new car for $23,000. And so that could be the quote. You could type in comments. And from here, if you want to go ahead and generate the quote, I guess and we ship the car out, and so now it's received, and we're going to convert it to an invoice. And we got those choices. We want to go to the invoice after we create it. And I did assign it. And so now it's at our invoice, and on an accrual basis. On your cash basis, you'll be done at this point in time. On an accrual basis, you would go ahead and post it, and that's when it would debit accounts receivable and credit this 4005 revenue account. Now, if you were to receive payment, and we did cover this in one of our first ones, you could go here and enter in the payment, or if they're not going to pay anything now, or they're only going to make a partial payment, we could go in here and just put in a partial payment of, let's just say $10,000, and apply payment. If we want to print a receipt, we can. And so now it's showing that total is 24,840. They paid 10,000 to leave that balance due. And if you wanted to go ahead and print at this point, you could just do a print preview. And you'll see whatever you typed in comments would be showing up in here. If you did have this order source, you see these things do not have to be populated, but if you did fill those in, those would be populated. And it's going to show, of course, your name and address and the customer's address there. And then this can, a lot of people will use this as a paid invoice because it shows the payment. And if, you know, this was the check number that was used to be paid, or if it was credit card, you put CC in terms of the credit card charge. And again, you could go ahead and print, or if you decide that you're going to implement the email, when you go to print, you have that option that you can email or print and email. So I mean, you might want an office copy and email to them, but there is some additional setup to put in your email address and who your provider is and your password and so forth. And again, we could set up a separate session that just focuses on the setup of emailing invoices and statements. So in most cases, in the short term, you're just going to do a print or a preview, either one, and generate the invoices. So that did bring up the fact that the pre-printed invoices that you might have with your People's Choice Classic are not used. You can order pre-printed invoices, but most of our People's Choice Accounting desktop users don't use pre-printed invoices. They just use the standard or simple invoice, or they'll use their letterhead and generate it just as I was showing you here a little bit ago. Now, if you were going to create, it's like, well, I just want a service item. I can go into here and I want to, or professional, and you can see how that changes. So this is defaulting as a quantity of 1. You know, you could have what and 12 carpet, say, and we don't have a fund. We're not doing fund accounting. Oops. And I'll just put it into hardware sales, and so if you can see there's no quantity, it's just the total. And when you go to view that particular invoice in that format, you can see that it just has work performed. And so you can type in anything you would want there. If you decide you want to put in comments, like an address, and you can put that in here. And what's nice about this is whatever you put in the comments, you have an option to include that description to show up on your statement. So install carpet or whatever the surface might be. So when you look at it from the invoice standpoint, you'll see that down here as well as the work performed. But that will also, this here will also show up on the statement as some additional description of what took place on a particular invoice. Because sometimes you might have 15 different items on an invoice. You don't want all 15 items listed on the statement. You just want to reference a particular invoice. But maybe you want to have a little more description of what was on that invoice than just the total of the invoice and the invoice number. So then when they come in, if they didn't pay, you know, I'm going to pick me from the list. And so now it's showing that, oh, okay, I still owe $14,840, but I can't pay it right now in full anyway. So again, another check number, whatever it might be. and you're going to pay another $5,000. And if you didn't know or couldn't remember what this invoice is, you do have the option to drill down to that invoice when you're here, and you can actually see what you did on that particular invoice. Oh, okay, now I remember. And so it can be just like, I didn't remember getting that particular one. So we've now got a $600 and this 14, but so how do we want to apply this? Okay, you have a couple of options, and we'll go into one is just auto allocate. So if you click auto allocate, what it's going to do, it's going to take the oldest invoice and apply the amount paid to that oldest invoice. But you don't have to do it that way. We can clear allocation, and maybe you would say, well, let's go ahead and pay off that $600 one first, and then put the rest of it towards the other one. So we've split it up between $600 and $4,400, and so we'll go ahead and apply that payment. Oh, total credit card fees. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, that was an issue in a converted data. I'm sorry. So in most of you where I've gotten your data, you do have already have some items in the items, products, and services in the I'm gonna just jump back in here. It has more detail. And those things will be copied over from your People's Choice Classic. I know some of you have a large, would like to have more items in inventory, but as the time that's required to enter all those items in has made it impractical in most cases. But we do have an add-on product we call the Data Manager, and it's designed to import and export data into People's Choice or out of People's Choice. And one of the import functions is to import inventory. And it is a semi-custom feature because most suppliers have their own spreadsheet of product listings. And so there's a matter of getting the default file that you would be getting from a particular supplier, and we map the import. And then that import could be to update pricing or to add new items to the inventory, or if they discontinued items, that type of thing. A lot of suppliers will give you the current pricing and current item list that's available from them. And that would be getting into, this section here of inventory. So in your Classic program, whatever you have in items, product, service, and Classic will be brought into this list, and you'll have that same list in here. And so you could go ahead and pull up a particular item that was in Classic, and it's going to be looking somewhat like this. And so if you want to change the description, you can. It's here if you're going to do perpetual inventory. You will have stock and service. And if you're just going to have it as a service, as kind of a macro, you can still track the cost, even though it might be a product. But if you're not tracking quantity on hand, just set it up as a services. You can still have the full description, like for each particular kind of item. You can still track the cost on it, and of course the retail price. But those are the basic things that you would have. And this is really all you need. And on the third page, is where you would say, well, every time I sell this item, I want it to go to this sales account. But each inventory item could have a different general ledger sales account. And same with cost of goods sold. You can have a cost of goods sold account. Typically, there's just one of those, but you could have multiple ones. And if you are keeping a perpetual inventory, then you'll want to assign a control account for your inventory account. But like I said, a lot of people only deal with the sales side of thing. They don't track a perpetual inventory and keep that on their balance sheet. But it's possible to do. And there might need to be some special setup and training if you're going to go from not tracking perpetual inventory to a perpetual inventory, because there'll be some groundwork that'll need to be done. First of all, you'll have to do a physical inventory to count up everything that you have, and then update those quantities in the system. So it isn't necessarily a fast, simple project. And but most of you have just been using it to not track what's on hand, but just to do as a quick fill for filling it out, and possibly to track the cost. So that's the only time you'll be doing it in here. But this whole purchases one, the only thing you'll be really using here will be setting up your own suppliers and vendors. And again, those will get copied over from your People's Choice Classic program. And those item products and services. These other items you don't have in Classic. We mentioned purchase orders a little bit earlier. If you were doing a perpetual inventory, you could potentially have multiple locations where your inventory is stored. So you can set up different warehouses. Again, those purchase orders can be converted to bills. And this would be the closest thing to an unpaid bill. If you were to bring up, this is a bill that's been entered in. And so you pull up a reason for expense, you pull up the vendor, put in the date, put in the vendor's invoice number, what the amount of the invoice was, what the terms are with that vendor, and then what was your expense for that particular bill. Again, but this can be broken down into multiple categories, just like a regular check. And some like to do this even if they pay it right away, because you can go ahead and enter in a payment right from here. Or if you're getting multiple invoices throughout the month, then I'm just going to go ahead and duplicate one and assign a different number. And so we've added that to our list. So if we don't mark it paid here, what we do is at the end of the month, or if you pay twice a month, you would go to accounts payable, and then you would select the date of the check, which bank account you're going to use to make these payments. Oops. I'll leave it on checking. And I'm not going to apply any of the credits. And so it's showing all your open invoices or bills that you have with people out there. And this is the amount of money that you have in your bank account. So you're going to say, well, I'm just going to pay the telephone bill. And just like in invoicing, you can drill down to that bill and see, well, what was that bill for? So we got, I duplicated that just to show that we can have two open invoices. We click next. It's going to pay two bills. It's going to be a total of this amount. So we click finish. And then it's going to go ahead. And if we want, we can go ahead and print the check right after we create it. I'm just going to say okay, but not necessarily print. That's been applied. So now that bill's been marked paid. And you can always go into pull up a vendor and update their information, but whether it's accounts receivable for a customer or accounts payable, you can always go into the history and see every invoice or every bill that's been generated, and you can drill down. You can see that we don't owe anything. This is what was paid, but you can always drill down and look at, it was for that, and I paid it on that date with this check number. And so you have a lot of information that you can set up. Now, this particular one, they never set up a default expense account, but you'll want to do that, and those will get carried over from your People's Choice Classic program. So I'll put it to advertising. You don't normally do that, but would have been telephone probably. But again, this section, except for the inventory list and your suppliers that you have in Classic, none of this is available in Classic. And so you would, if you want to move into that, and maybe you'll want to talk to me and say, how do we make that move to get that set up? Because it might require some special attention in terms of how we set it up, whether you're going to want to go to perpetual inventory or some of the various flexibility in that regard. So I'll go ahead and open it up to other questions. Is there any? Looking at the chat, I'm not seeing anything in the chat. So if there's, we've gone here for a little over an hour and a half. I know it gets a little long when you're doing two different topics, both for payroll and accounts receivable. So I tried to speed through just to give you enough information to be thinking ahead of what you may want to implement in your payroll system as you complete the conversion and are up and running live. Then you can start thinking about, well, what else do I want to add? And same way with the accounts receivable side of things. Does each line item in a professional format get its own comments line? The comments box is just a box at the bottom of the invoice that basically describes everything that's on that invoice, or special notes in terms of if it's a delivery kind of thing that says, item dropped off at such and such. So you type in the comments on there in terms of what you would like to show up on a statement. I see that's Katie, and I know you use, if I recall correctly, looking at your data, you basically just had categories that you were using and not individual inventory items that describe things that you sell for. You were typing those particular things in, I believe off a manual invoice. So you would, that was combined, if I remember right, that category was for just auto-filling the sales account that you wanted that particular line item to go to. Okay, good. Any other questions? So I apologize for the few glitches. I always believe in Murphy's Law. Something can go wrong, it will. And so there were a couple things that did throw me a little here, but hopefully you got a better idea of some of the capabilities of what you can do once the data is converted, and hopefully a little bit of a appreciation of all the work that's been eliminated with the conversion service, all the basic setup that you don't have to go through that we covered today. So I hope you found that a helpful approach to see what was done, what is being done for you from a conversion. I mean, a lot of you are attracted to bringing in all the history, which I think is a great feature. But the second value of the conversion is all the setup that's eliminated for you. But it doesn't mean that you're done with setup, because there are other features available that you may want to implement that will benefit your business. And so that was part of the objective today as well, is just to give you some insight and some of the things that you might want to implement after you've had your data converted. So if there's any other questions at all, otherwise, we're going to go ahead and call it a session. I'll get the recording posted, so you should receive it in an email probably on Monday. And I will, you'll be getting in the Monday email the agenda for next week's topic. we'll be covering, and I encourage all of you to submit any questions or any particular topics you would really like to focus on, and I'll put those on the agenda. And so we make sure that we cover information that's pertinent to you and not me guessing at what's most important. So hopefully this is kind of a jumping off point. Okay, I saw what I can do now. Please cover this in a little more detail because I wanted to implement that in my business. And like I say, the most common ones that I can think of is the direct deposit setup and the MICR check printing a blank check stock and those type of things. But you saw some of the other things such as vacation pay and the different inventory options. I mean, we covered a lot of different material here of what you could use. And a lot of it isn't going to apply to you, but some of it may apply to you. So let me know and I will try and cover. And if it takes a separate session, then we'll schedule a one-on-one session to really implement something that may be a little more complicated than you thought. So if there's no other, I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting. And like I said, I'll get the recording to you as soon as it's available. It takes a little while to process, to be honest with you. So let me see here. So I'm going to go ahead and stop recording. And I am